Okay, good afternoon. Tzaraim Tovim, Marhaba. I'm very pleased to call to order this next session, which is on the theme of interfaith dialogue and ameliorating interreligious dialogue, ameliorating interreligious conflict, in terms of the thought of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And as we know, we're living in a situation in which religious extremism is rife, but the challenge is finding a dedicated but enlightened interreligious discourse, people on all sides, all religions, who can be committed to their faith and yet engage the other in a positive way. And just in that context, I'd like to acknowledge the presence here of my students in a special course. By the way, I'm Dr. Ben Malov, and these are my students. Raise your hand, please. Oh, wow, okay. This course is part of the School of Communication International Program, Jewish-Arab Interreligious Dialogue, of which the course is an example and an effort to use religion as a bridge. In fact, the course, in relation to some of the themes that were discussed last night or touched upon in regard to the thinking of Rabbi Sacks, and by the way, we do touch upon Rabbi Sacks in the course, is the three pillars of the course, but relevant to the thought of Rabbi Sacks, are mutual respect, self-respect, and mutual enrichment. And as a subtitle, as one of the objectives of the course, we would like to see the students coming out as better Muslims, better Jews, and better Christians, with an openness to the world, but more dedicated to their faith traditions. All right, we have three distinguished panelists, more than distinguished, I would say. So we have Professor Meir from Tel Aviv University, Professor Ephraim Meir, emeritus from here at Bar-Ilan University, and Dr. Alon Gottstein-Goshen from the Elijah School. I'll give more of an in-depth introduction to each of them, but our first speaker will be Professor Meir, and among her credits, first of all, she's a professor of religious studies at Tel Aviv University, and among many books, her most recent book is Jesus, the Jew in Christian Memory, Theological and Philosophical Explorations, which was published in 2020 by Cambridge University Press, and in fact is now out in paper book. The book was subject to high accolades, was even the subject of a major panel at a recent conference of biblical studies. She has published widely on post-Holocaust, post-Shoah Christian thought. She's also an expert in the area of the role of law in interreligious relations and the notion of otherness in interreligious studies. And the topic of her presentation will be introducing dignity in difference. That's connected to Rabbi Sacks's book, The Dignity of Difference, the notion of otherness in interreligious philosophy. Professor Meir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this amazing conference. And wonderful to see so many students here. That's very impressive. So ahlan wa sahlan. Introducing dignity to difference, the notion of otherness in interreligious philosophy. The dignity of difference is not Jonathan Sacks' magnum opus, his greatest work. It's a little book. In English, it's even smaller than in the Hebrew translation. But this little book, published in 2003, has played a central role in introducing the notion of difference to contemporary interreligious thinking. That there should be dignity in being different, and that there is dignity in difference, was still new to interreligious discourse at the change of millennium.
Just be a little closer.
Okay. And now everything from the start. No, I'm just kidding. The notion of the otherness of the other was introduced to popular philosophical thought only in the 1990s, Also in Israel, we not always spoke about the others. Very few religious thinkers then picked up Levinesian language. Even in Jewish studies, the term difference didn't have the same sound it has now. It was not used as possessing dignity in and of itself. I would even say that the qualifier dignity was precisely what was missing in the late 1990s difference discourse. Daniel Boyarin's book about Paul, a radical Jew, that roughly identified difference as such with Judaism, contrasting a Christianity essentialized as striving for sameness, appeared only in 1994. The use of the word difference with this sound as a critical term in itself, a value or a criterion leading to valuable activities like negotiating difference, and has become common only very recently. As for example, in Sarit Katan-Gribitz's very good book, Time and Difference in Rabbinic Judaism, which appeared in 2020. Altogether, difference as a cultural or religious value and negotiating difference as a religiously or culturally valuable activity are relatively new in religious studies and still new to Christian thinking. Jonathan Sachs wrote The Dignity of Difference after 9/11. We heard about that, and its major outline is simple, not simplistic, but simple. We tend to be startled by the habits, behaviors, and conduct of strangers. This fear easily translates into hatred. Animosity between peoples is an obvious consequence of their unacquaintedness. This is not a particularly sophisticated analysis, nor is there anything really new about the claim. The typical Christian answer to the problem of unacquaintedness is an encouragement to become acquainted, coming closer. Franz Rosenzweig even sees this movement of turning the neighbor into a brother as the essential Christian way to establish and maintain community. That is, vom Mitmensch zum Bruder. By introducing dignity to difference, Jonathan Sachs injects a new idea. New mainly to traditional Christian thought, less so to early dogmatic discourse, new to Christian majority culture, and new to majority culture is the idea that strangeness need not, even should not, be reduced. Instead of trying to dissolve divergence, we should append dignity to difference, or find dignity in difference itself. For the Christian culture of community building, this was new. Also today, in Western Christian liberal invitation, you often find phrases like, no matter where you come from, no matter how you look and whom you love, you are welcome here. So you find variations of this open invitation on the doors of liberal Christian congregations in the States, a lot. You're welcome, and your origins and orientations do not matter. This means progress, as it is anti-discriminatory, and we often realize that progress only when it is threatened by regress. No discrimination, that's good news. But your difference does not matter. None of your differences. Maybe also the one difference you did want to matter, because you may have come to take pride in it. Or you have begun to perceive it as the legacy of those before you, who could not openly live it. Or maybe even could not think of that specific difference with pride. Maybe your ancestors were persecuted for this precise difference. Integration, and in contemporary Christian community language, welcoming, typically rolls over all your differences at once. In my research, I ask whether the lack of dignity attributed to difference in many Christian cultures and theologies is inherently Christian or more likely a product of majority culture rule. I have found the notion of otherness connected to divinity in Christian thought, but not in popular theologies and popular Christian interpretation. Theologically, now we do a little, for the students, we do a little run through the notion of otherness and the other in religious studies at large. Everybody will recognize something. Nobody has to know everything. Theologically, the idea of God as radically different or ultimate other has been strongly pronounced by the Swiss theologian Karl Barth at the beginning of the 20th century. You should remember that name, Karl Barth, because he will be also the one who is then formulating a theological Christian resistance against Hitler. So he shall be remembered, the Swiss theologian Karl Barth, at the beginning of the 20th century. Samuel Moyn, some other people know him, has detailed this early 20th century notion of otherness in his book Origins of the Other from 2005. For the idea that God sides with otherness, is on the side of otherness, the Christian theological world had to wait until the end of the 20th century. I quote Karl Barth's student, the German post-Shoah theologian Friedrich Wilhelm Marquardt, who late in his life studied the works of Levinas. I quote, "God is present and is known where one finds someone other to him or to her." The German is remarkable here, and the original is even gendered, which is very unusual for German theologians, so I'll read it to you also in German. Gott ist da und wird erkannt, wo der eine einen im anderen findet und eine ihr andere. So that is, presence of God is where this encounter of one of the other takes place. Post-Shoah thought. Beyond Karl Barth's notion of God as ultimate other, we find here God's presence initiated by an encounter of not just one and another, but one finding his or her specific other. There are several Christian theologians today who pick up ideas and terms from Levinas. I myself have developed a theory of otherness at the heart of Christianity as the memory of Jesus, a halachic Jew. Yes, I do refer to a halachic man of Soloveitchik. A halachic Jew conveys otherness to Jesus' non-Jewish followers today. That's not now in this lecture, don't worry. So that's my book. But Levinas' philosophy of a responsibility for the otherness of the other has never become popular ethics, nor is it easily applicable to interreligious thought. In contrast, Jonathan Sacks formulated his notion of the dignity of difference explicitly within interreligious relations. To Christianity, this was a new perspective, but not a difficult one to grasp. Unlike the unlimited responsibility for the otherness of the other, a Levinasian concept that does not easily translate into interfaith theory or practice. The idiom dignity of difference was new. But dignity is a core value in Christian tradition, a word Christians know as their own and use in constructive theology and theological ethics. It is also a word Muslim philosophers can relate to. According to Boyarin, not difference, I'm always in dialogue with Daniel Boyarin, appreciate him very much. According to Boyarin, and don't agree, of course. According to Boyarin, not difference, but the dissolving of difference is at the heart of Christian thought. His proof text is the extensively quoted verse from Paul's epistle to the Galatians. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. The same verse is also frequently quoted by Christian theologians, but here typically in the context of opposing discrimination. It's usually quoted positively by critical thinkers. While I disagree with Boyarin's preferential reading of Galatians over Romans, I agree with him that the Bible does not offer a verse explicitly praising diversity as such as originating in God's will. The Quran does. Surah 5:48, and some of you will know that beautiful verse. If God had willed, he would have made you one community. But things are as they are to test you in what he has given you. So compete with each other in doing good. In the history of Jewish thought on diversity, Moses Mendelssohn comes close to this. Brothers, if you care for true piety, let us not feign agreement where diversity is evidently the plan and purpose of providence. None of us thinks and feels exactly like his fellow man. That is from 1783. Boyarin's near equation of diaspora Judaism with difference suggests that you can actually constitute yourself as standing for difference and personifying difference itself if you belong to a certain minority group. In contrast, Levinas's notion of otherness is not open to be inhabited. The other is always the other. Maybe that is why the wordy phrase of the responsibility for the otherness of the other should not lightheartedly be shortened. Otherness itself may or may not introduce an ethics, may or may not meet responsibility. Also, difference in itself has no predefined ethical direction. It is to Jonathan Sachs' credit to qualify difference with dignity. And it is certainly dignity what we need for all our differences in Israeli society today. Our educational system reproduces difference. But this idea of difference as a value in itself leads to experiences of sameness in children. There are very few opportunities for children in Israel to experience diversity in the classroom, as most children learn in a school system that caters their specific difference marker. When certain men politicians ask to segregate maternity wards in Israeli hospitals, I would call that idolatry of difference. The memory of Jonathan Sachs may help Christian thinkers and Christian majority societies to learn God-willed difference, and us Israelis to restore God-willed dignity to our differences here today. Thank you.